All right. How's it going, everybody? Eric here with Pure Pressure. Really excited for our guest today. Should be a great IG Live. Just getting things started and getting everyone in on the conversation. So thank you for joining up, everyone who's tuning in. Looks like Harry has just joined too, so we'll get him on in just a second. Harry, if you have any issues, just give me a shout. Really excited for today's guest, Harry Rose, with Rosette Wellness and Emerald Cup Supply Co. We'll start off with an intro when he is able to get through. Morning to Emerald Extracts. Glad to have you guys in here. And then, Harry, for you, it should pop up a little box as a request to join. So if you have any issues, you can pop out of the live and come back in, and that should work out for you. Thanks for everyone who's tuning in. Hope everyone's having a good week. Like always, going to say this a couple times. Hey, what's up, Fox? Going to put this episode up on YouTube after the fact. Just waiting for us to get started here. All right. Cool. So I saw Rosette Wellness joined. Didn't quite get the prompt yet, so if you're having any issues, Harry, just let me know. All you got to do is probably pop out of the IG Live, come back in, and it will prompt you to join. All right, there we go. Cool. Connecting now. Thank you all for bearing with us as we get started here. This is going to be a good one. Hey, there you are, or there's a wall.
Hey now. There we go.
How you doing?
How's it going today?
Hey, it's going really well. Are you in a good spot for the interview now? Ready to rock and roll?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm
Okay,
out on the mountain today,
cool.
so things are a little challenging internet-wise, but we're good to go now.
Hey, man, if you've got fast enough internet to do this, way up there, you got it made.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons we actually took this property a long time ago, is we're line of sight to the tower, but all the properties around me don't have internet, so it's challenging out here.
Well, that's awesome that you guys did that. So before we get started, and Harry, I'm going to say this a couple times throughout the broadcast just because people kind of come and go. Most people will tune in for a portion of it, but maybe not the whole thing. We've got Harry Rose, CEO of Rosette Wellness, also linked up with Emerald Cup Supply Co. We're going to be doing an episode today. A lot of great questions. Harry knows a ton, and the interactions I've had with you, you've really blown my mind with some of your knowledge. And this episode will be up on YouTube so that we can share that. You can share that with your friends. But in a couple weeks, we'll have this. So, if you don't catch the whole thing, we will have the full episode after the fact. So I always like to start off with intros. Harry, tell everyone about yourself and who you're working with and, where you come from.
Well, my name's Harry Rose, and like you said, I'm the CEO of what we call Rosette Lab Works, is the name of our lab. We produce two brands there currently, which is Rosette Wellness, that makes a full line of medicinal products. The flagship being our tincture line, which is very extensive for humans and pets. And that comes out of my need for medical cannabis myself. I had an episode a number of years back where I really had an extremely bad bout of a fatal condition, an autoimmune disease, and tried a number of things, and cannabis is what took me out of it. So that's the birth of the tincture line. On the adult use side, a good friend of mine and partner, Tim Blake, who is the founder of the Emerald Cup competition in California, has a product line called Emerald Cup Supply Co. that was active in the 215 era during the medical years. And once 64 came in, he had a number of challenges, and there, lots of stories in between. I've helped Tim and been friends with him for a number of years, but helped him with his cancer conditions and other conditions medically as well. So we're tight in a number of ways, and our ethics align. and so he needed a vehicle and help to get his brand back to market. And so he chose me and us to produce that line. And
Mhm.
so the two entities blended together very nicely. It's still a work in progress as always, but we're putting out their solventless line. We're doing solventless cartridges. We're doing solventless gram jars. We're doing lots of flour and hash infused pre rolls and things of that nature for the Emerald Cup Supply Co. product line. We actually expanded our shop and put in, a wet lab and more extensive rosin production for Emerald Cup Supply Co. And really, we launched that December of last year at the Emerald Cup,
Mhm.
and we've been slowly, carefully manipulating the 64 market, taking our time, and now we have a fresh season, fresh harvest, and we're really going to start going for it with the solventless products on the Emerald Cup side and on the Rosette side. So it's been crazy, and it's pretty exciting. But that's me and us in a nutshell.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for giving that overview. I think I'm really excited to get into some of these questions, but just for everyone, you're located in the Emerald Triangle. Have you been working in California for most of your cannabis career, or did you start somewhere else?
I started really young. I think I had a natural attraction to cannabis.
Mhm.
I tried it at a very early age. I started cultivating when I was 14,
Wow.
if you could even call it that back then. I grew several plants. I did live on the East Coast in New York, where it was highly illegal and very difficult to cultivate.
Mhm.
Um, you know, Definitely a lot of storytelling there, but we grew some inside. We definitely grew some outside. Believe it or not, there is sort of an underground network there, even back then, of growers in upstate New York. And some of the legendary roadkill type of skunk actually was grown up there. I don't know where it came from, but certainly a lot of it
Wow.
was cultivated up there. And that was my only exposure to the real roadkill skunk was from those days when I was really young. And you know, I ended up becoming a entertainment industry master electrician. Right out of high school, I went on the road with bands. I became a master electrician. My father's background is very extensive in being a mechanical engineer, and I grew up under that, and he did a lot of training, so it was sort of a natural progression. And through that career, I had a lot of exposure to California and the whole world, really. I did a lot of traveling, being a roadie, so to speak.
Hmm.
So I kind of knew where the cannabis spots were. Being in the entertainment industry, there's a lot of cannabis in the
Hmm.
entertainment industry and always has. And I always wanted to live in California after seeing what was going on there, even at an early stage, even before Prop 215. California still had a very active scene for cannabis. And so eventually, what happened was I did move out to California to advance my entertainment industry career and sort of settle down and not be on the road anymore. But it was kind of too late. I got extremely sick. I was working too hard. I think the stress is what did it.
Mm.
Went through the whole Western medicine version and almost died, and found my solution in cannabis. And the whole time I lived in California, I grew indoors, and eventually made my way up to the Emerald Triangle a long time ago now, but to live off grid with my wife and start a family and just learn how to live off the land and get away from the big city, the stress and globetrotting definitely got to me and so on. So the whole time, my whole life, I've been growing since a very early age. I always took it with me. I always made seeds, and
Hmm.
you know, things were very different when I was a kid. You got all your information from just a handful of books
Hmm.
and high times, and then it was a matter of meeting up with people in secret and a lot of experimentation,
Hmm.
which really is what, it's all about. It's all about the plant, the plant is the magic. You just have to learn how to let the magic out of it. And so it's just practice, practice, practice. And so really my cannabis knowledge comes out of my love for cannabis at an early age, the need for it, I think emotionally and physically eventually.
Mm-hmm.
And, being an engineer mind and being a scientist mind and just being a tinkerer, I just really enjoyed the possibilities with it.
Mm-hmm.
And so throughout, my career, so to speak, with cannabis, I've cultivated in every way you could think of, from living soils all the way to pure chemical hydroponics. I've extracted every way imaginable, CO2, hydrocarbon, many different solventless versions, vibration, water, you name it. I just
Wow.
love getting my hands in it
Uh-huh.
and, experimenting. And that's really all you had way back when. There was no knowledge base. In the early 80s, we all just went out and bought a bunch of silk screen and tried different weaves and saw what we got the best hash from. And all the basic information came from, High Times and some early like Mountain Girl books and things like that. And it was just trial and error over and over and over again. Getting materials and everything was highly illegal and really hard as well. So,
Mm-hmm.
to go out and buy a still back then, forget about it. You needed a DEA number and it was crazy. So we had to do things very convoluted and the hardest way possible. So nowadays it's a dream come true to be able to order real equipment and use efficient procedures and be out in the open and, use shore power and not be hiding in the woods, and you know what I mean? So it's been a long journey. It's a very convoluted long journey that started in New York and ended up in California in the Bay Area. And eventually I just moved up to the Emerald Triangle, and I don't plan on ever leaving.
Yeah, no, that is a crazy story just to hear how far you've come and how much experience you have with this. I mean, you said early on in your explanation, kind of about your introduction that, the medical side of things seems like it really brought you in personally and emotionally. And is that what kicked off your tincture line? Because that's what helped you. I mean, walk me through your tinctures and Rosette Wellness and kind of how you've really made a name for yourself starting out with that.
Well, early on, to give credit where it's due, a good friend of mine, Lawrence Ringo, is no longer with us, was a neighbor of mine in my subdivision. My subdivision is 76 40-acre parcels. Everybody here grows. It's an old school type of typical Humboldt subdivision, where everybody started growing in the woods, eventually grew outdoors. Now people have more complicated greenhouse systems and such.
Mm-hmm.
But like I said before, I moved here to live off grid and experiment with that, but I became sick right away. And so I did the traditional medicine method where I went to a GI doctor and they put me on all kinds of anti-inflammatories and antibiotics and steroids. And really, that's all they have, and it just makes you sicker. Unless you're really lucky, it just makes you really sick, and that's what happened to me.
Mm-hmm.
And so then I tried some other alternative medicines from New Zealand and a couple other places, and that made me really sick.
Mm-hmm.
And sort of parallel to all this, unbeknownst to me, the CBD thing was just becoming born.
Mm-hmm.
And people didn't really know that much about it at all. And I had gotten wind of a guy named Dr. Rick Simpson before Phoenix Tears and any of the, Phoenix Tears, exposure, who turned me on to a girl in the Midwest who had what I had, very young, and she almost died. And she recovered by making a very crude, extremely crude version of hash oil by way of using an old school vaporizer and putting her herb in it and letting it vaporize and then scraping the inside of it out and eating that. And they were in Kansas and they could only get an eighth a day, and it was dirt weed, and it was crazy, but it worked. And so I figured, hey, I'm in Humboldt, I'm a grower, I have really good herb, I should be able to do this. And so that was when I made my first batch of pure Chem Dog, what people would now call Rick Simpson oil.
Mm-hmm.
And at that same time that I started taking that, I did start to feel better. I was very sick, so it took me an extra long time to sort of come back. I think other people recover faster if they catch it faster. Apparently, I was inflamed, for 8 years and didn't even realize it because I was so occupied, I guess.
Whoa.
Um, at the same time, my neighbor Lawrence was actually starting to do some testing before test labs opened to help calibrate and create SOPs for somebody that opened a lab, is the basic gist of it. And he was looking for the highest THC cannabis he could find. And what he ended up finding is all his old school strains actually was high in CBD, which nobody talked about or knew what to do with at that point. But the woman who was in charge of the lab was also involved with biology in her former career. And so she knew a lot about CBD for that time and said that, this is something and we should really start to hone in on this.
Mm.
And even though Ringo was looking for the highest THC strains for the rec market, he decided to go for it. And right at that time, I had told him I was sick. He ended up giving me the first batch of oil that he made from the original Sour Tsunami plant, which was the first stabilized CBD strain that anybody knows about.
Wow.
And it was a 3-to-1. So I took his seed plant, took the oil from it, and started taking that instead of my Chem Dog oil. And another 2 months went by, and there's a lot in between, but another couple months went by, and I woke up one morning and forgot that I was sick, which was unbelievable. And anybody who's sick like this knows that you don't forget.
Mm.
And the fact that I got up and just started to act normal, then I caught myself and realized what had happened. So I kept taking a huge dose of that every day. We eventually cultivated more. We made more oil. I kept taking it at a high dosage because I was very frightened that I'd go back.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually, my body told me that I was there. After about a year of taking a gram of oil a day,
Wow.
my body told me I was there. So I cut back, and I still take the same type of blend to this day.
Mm-hmm.
It ended up becoming our balance formula. But I was eating the oil straight, and it was an ethanol extracted oil
Mm-hmm.
that was then decarboxylated to create THC
Mm-hmm.
and CBD. Then we discovered that the acids really help, so we started blending those into the oil, but I was still eating the oil straight.
Mm-hmm.
Once I felt better myself and stabilized myself and was able to work more, that's when a lot of patients really started coming my way through Ringo, through other organizations, different
Mm-hmm.
charities and projects and so on, and doctors. We're sending people sort of like the Underground Railroad to Lawrence and I, and we were making oil for a lot of people. And oil is very difficult to dose. I know a lot of people like taking RSO straight, and I do too. But for most people, it's really difficult. And that's when I started looking at different suspensions. And I started with alcohol like everybody else, but realized that it's very unstable. It evaporates and it conflicts with medication and it's harsh and so on. And we finally landed on using MCT oil, before I know of anybody using it. I'm sure that other people used it other ways, but the molecule size was perfect for penetration, both sublingually and topically. Very fast efficacy when you put the cannabinoids suspended in it. So
Mm-hmm.
we really hit the mark there, and that enabled us to create formulas where patients could know that if they take a dropper full, it's the same amount of cannabinoids every time. So that was really the birth of the tincture for us. And we started making tinctures at that point instead of straight oil for patients.
Right.
And it got to the point of ridiculousness, and we had to start a legitimate company and start getting it out there through the legal channels that were, which was dispensaries at that point. Most of the dispensaries either wanted very cheap product or they were really interested in adult use. So we had a big challenge there. And we were going directly to the patients and working with a lot of critically ill patients through doctors and organizations still. And eventually those patients, by going to the stores enough, told them that they wanted this product, and they started carrying us on the shelves. This was a long time ago at this point. Wow. In the 215 era. It became really big during the 215 era, our tincture line. It was very popular. And then when 64 crossed over and different compliance things happened, we had a number of challenges, and we ended up rebranding as Rosette Wellness in 2018. And we had a soft launch, and we've been kind of ramping up what we're doing now that we're partnered with EC, Emerald Cup. We're definitely entering another level of ramping up and looking towards an even bigger footprint. We're building our team out, and things are moving forward along those lines. But basically, that's the history of the tincture line. And the reason it's so extensive, it started out as a 3-to-1, which is what I needed, which is our number 3. Cancer patients needed a 1-to-1, which we call number 1. The neurological patients, the kids, the
seizures and
patients, they needed a 20-to-1. So we came out with the number 20. So that was our original line, were those 3 tinctures. Then we started getting requests for the acids, because we were given doctors and patients the acids to play with to see if that helped accentuate the core tinctures. Well, that became a staple too. Then we came out with our CBDA permanently and our THCA permanently. And then we started doing blends, which is what I took for years, but I wanted to perfect before I put it out on the market. So we have our balance blend, we have our wellness blend, we have our REM blend to help reset the body clock for sleep. We also have a straight THC, which sometimes people need for active seizures, or just to add more THC to any of the other formulations. And our formulations are meant to be able to compound if you need different effects from different ones. You can just layer them or use them, individually. And the same goes for the pets. I started working with a couple of dogs with cancer a long time ago. The word got out, it got out of control. So we finally created the pet line, which is the same pet line today. All our tinctures are full spectrum cryogenic ethanol extraction, which we have found to be the most effective in the medical realm. In terms of the constituents that it actually picks up and the constituents that it leaves behind and the efficacies and so on. Really, if you look, all the data that's out there, anything that actually has consistent efficacy was tested with ethanolic extractions. And the same goes true throughout a lot of the pharmaceutical industry and the botanical medicine industries. A lot of them, in order to get the proper spectrums, in order to not break any bonds, in order to get exactly what you're looking, and all the vitamins and minerals and enzymes, the ethanolic extraction is the most complete as far as we know. There's a lot of big gap in knowledge still there, but there are some things that we use the solventless for in terms of the acids, but even the acids, they're still lacking a lot of these enzymes and vitamins. In the end, it becomes too isolated. So anyway, that's why we use ethanol for that. For the most part, we do use, solventless for a lot of products as well. There's a lot of companies out there that think that they're revolutionizing something by having, live rosin in their medical products, but all the solventless stuff we've been doing for a very long time, and we highly believe in it. But we just use what's best for the patient for that particular need.
I mean, that's admirable, because we're even though we're obviously very pro solventless as an advocate for pure pressure and solventless extraction, we accept the fact that there are multiple extraction types that provide benefits. Just so everyone knows who's tuned in, we're not saying that solventless is the only way to do this. I've got some questions for you One, Grow at Home with Us just asked real quick that he's been suffering with IBS for years, and if you had any recommendations. And then I'd love to dive into, how you apply Solventless to what you do and what you think about it. Do you have any tincture recommendations for IBS or, some of those gastrointestinal issues?
I have IBS myself. I have IBD. So, GI and autoimmune diseases are something that really I have the most expertise with. So for IBS, I think that the person asking the question must know that diet is crucial and it's not intuitive in terms of what is good and bad. Trial and error is really what's necessary. But with IBS, a lot of times it changes from month to month, season to season. In terms of tincture, I would personally recommend women take wellness and men would take the balance tinctures. I would recommend starting out slow and finding your minimum effective dose. Typically, at least with our tinctures, people start with maybe a quarter dropper 3 times a day, 8 hours apart. Definitely set your watch, drink plenty of water, and you start at a quarter dropper full 3 times a day and work your way up. And you'll notice that things will start to change. When it comes to CBD, you will feel immediate effects, but there's more effects that start to unfold after a week, after 2 weeks. So you really need to stay saturated, stay consistent, and don't get frustrated. Your issue, I'm sure, didn't happen overnight, and it's not going to go away overnight. And so just stick with it. Be persistent. Set your watch to take your meds, and stay hydrated is the first. There's a lot that I could go into, and actually people can reach out to me at info@rosettewellness.com. I converse with a lot of patients. It's part of my passion. I'm not a doctor, but I do have a lot of experience with cannabinoid therapy, and I feel like I could definitely at least help comfort and work with people to help them get on the right track. So,
well, that's really kind of you to offer. And I know you've been around so long and dealing with the medical aspect of this for so long. So thank you for offering that and that insight. Where does Solventless and where do rosin, ice water hash, or sift, where do they fit into your extraction lineup, and what kinds of products come out of those that you're excited about?
Well, we have new capabilities that I'm excited about, and we're working on those products that will be coming out. I don't want to exactly reveal what they are yet, but there's some exciting oral versions of our products where the acidic and terpenoid, especially spectrums, will be enhanced by way of using the solventless, both live rosin and the sift.
Very cool.
And I also plan on, because I've seen the results, on using some of those products and actually like a very carefully done water hash, then extract it along with some of the other material that we would extract in the cryoethanolic process. So we would actually combine those two in the ethanol process. In certain cases, we would actually do infusions directly with the solventless products into our MCT oil or into these new product lines, which will be revealed soon. The other end of it is we're definitely going to be releasing some both hash rosin and live rosin dabs, for people. I highly believe in it myself. A lot of these gastrointestinal diseases and neurological diseases are very painful. And one way to deal with that is to take cannabinoids several different ways, not just orally, but also topically, and also through phytal inhalation, dabbing, and vaporization. And so taking a dab, if you do it carefully and properly and don't, do some big high temp cherry red, dabs like we all used to do, you can really get a lot of benefits in pain relief and GI relief that way. So we're going to be coming out with some CBD types of hash rosin and live rosin, 1-to-1, 3-to-1,
Awesome.
20-to-1 type. And the same thing will go for the flower and the pre-rolls that we have. We're going to be infusing some pre-rolls with the CBD hash and the CBD hash rosin and things of that nature. And, Rosette has always offered specific THC products also for similar reasons: anxiety, insomnia, pain relief. And so we will be selecting and have selected for cultivation and just harvesting now certain strains that we're going to be releasing in terms of jars of flower and pre-rolls that are hash infused. So on the
Wow.
Rosette side, that's where we're really heading with solventless. And some of our new product lines will be using the solventless quite heavily. But a lot of times it's going to be in conjunction with the ethanolic. Symbiotically, they really work well together. We've been able to do things with ethanol extractions and then mechanically do separations with those extractions, or vice versa. Able to do certain crashing with ethanolic extractions after we do solventless extractions, because the solventless doesn't quite have, there's a lot of great solventless out there, but you can't crash everything.
Right.
And so
Strain dependent.
Because of the relationships and the terpene content isn't right. So we can accentuate that, with combining methods. There's between dry sift, water hash, rosin, ethanolic extractions. You can really come up with some very interesting things. There's a number of people out there that are starting to experiment that way, but only a few that I've seen have been successful. You can make a big mess pretty easily.
I do not doubt that at all. And maybe this is a trigger warning for you, but I would love to get your take, because you've told this to me in the past, and you talk a lot about, full spectrum extracts as being something that, you're a big believer in. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that full spectrum is this heavily abused term that most people probably don't actually understand the way that they think they understand. I could not go through this interview without you explaining to me and to everyone, what your take on full spectrum is, and what that means and why that's so important with the products you produce.
Sure, no problem. Full spectrum, just like a lot of terminology in this industry, has meant a lot of different things. But at least to me and most scientists and doctors and so on, what a full spectrum would mean is that you're taking the plant material and you are lifting the cannabinoid constituents, the full spectrum, off of the plant material without breaking the bonds and without distorting the molecules, without separation or isolation. And that is what we do with the ethanolic extraction, and suspend it in the MCT oil and present it to the patient in a number of different ways. So that a full spectrum should mean that it's an unadulterated version of what constituents are on that plant in terms of cannabinoids, terpenes, flavonoids, enzymes, there's vitamins. There's a whole range of things on that plant that you want to get off. But in general, for medical, especially, you're trying, and this is also why we have to be careful with how we make our solventless, how we make our rosin. In general, there's a lot of brands out there that have leaned into the contaminants that are in their product and trying to say how good it is. But the reality is, from somebody with an autoimmune disease or immune challenge disease or cancer or very serious diseases, you want as little or no chlorophyll in there as possible. If I want chlorophyll, I'll eat kale. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't need that in my pill or tincture. It's highly dangerous, and you don't know you could have very violent reactions with your GI tract from chlorophyll, and you would think you're doing yourself good. You're getting some benefits from the cannabinoids and terpenes, but you have this distress going on in your GI tract and you're not sure why. Also, plant fats and waxes, all the lipids, they tend to bring in the bad elements of water solubles and stay there. And
Mm,
so that's the other reason why ethanolic works really well. If you do it properly, it's a very poor
mm-hmm,
extractor of chlorophyll, fats, and waxes.
mm-hmm,
And so that's why we use that. On the rosin side and the wash side, we have to be extremely careful in our selection of the plant material so that we're going to have the best plant material with heads that will stay intact. And we need to be able to extract that gently. So I know a lot of people use big vortexing machines and a number of different methods.
mm-hmm.
We prefer to paddle. We prefer to do it gentler and longer. Eventually, I think there'll be
Mm,
mechanical versions that won't be so abusive.
yep.
A lot of people, it won't matter if those fats are in your rosin, but we're really trying to minimize that, at least on the rosette side, all the
Mm,
fats and waxes and chlorophylls for that reason.
mm-hmm,
And so basically, a full spectrum, to get back to it, the reason that we have seen and feel that full spectrum is best for medical purposes is you have the most well-rounded effect. Your body has dozens, several dozen receptors which cannabis can trigger if it has a full spectrum.
mm-hmm,
And so you're getting the most complete effect for the
mm-hmm,
longest period of time. And you're creating efficacy that works for the widest range of people. The
mm,
bell curve is as wide as it possibly can be, the wider the spectrum is. In saying that, you still need the right spectrum for what ailment you're trying to treat.
mm-hmm,
And, that's a whole other topic in terms of cannabinoid and terpene and flavonoid spectrums.
mm-hmm.
But ultimately, a full spectrum should mean a non-distorted string of cannabinoids and all the constituents involved so that you're getting a real snapshot of what was on that plant, the actual fingerprint, so you get the fullest, highest efficacy out of your medicine. Once you start to isolate, your body doesn't quite know what it is. And when you have pure molecules, your body is tuned to having all these other receptors struck at the same time to be able to metabolize it properly and for the reactions that happen between the brain blood barrier and so on. And so when you start isolating these molecules, like the Israelis found pure CBD, especially patients that are immune challenged, it can actually permanently destroy your kidneys. And
Whoa.
so you have, and the same is true with THC in terms of certain people, it can cause really high cortisol rushes.
Mm,
And certain cortisol effects can cause cancer or trigger other diseases that are not good for you. So anything in moderation is probably okay. But I think that, now with COVID, a lot of people are realizing that pre-existing conditions are only one sort of flag. You can have something going on with you. You just aren't aware of it, maybe your whole life until the right parameters hit, and then you're in trouble.
mm,
So I still believe in Mother Nature, and I
mm-hmm.
still believe the plant is the smartest. And so I believe that, consuming things full spectrum is the way to go, whether it's vaporizing or combusting a flower or the same thing with your oils. I think that we need to know more before people go hog wild with pure isolated molecules exclusively their whole life. I think that people should be cautious at the very least of doing things like that.
Where do you think the full spectrum claims start breaking down? And I'm not trying to lead you to call anyone out specifically, obviously. But you put out these great little like Harry's tidbits. I really like, some of the posts that you do and some of the information out there. And you say that it's like this very abused marketing term. Where does it break down, so to speak?
Well, there are people claiming full spectrum products, and I'm not trying to call anybody out, but
Hmm.
from mine and a lot of people's mindsets, if you have something like a CO2 extract, a lot of people will use, Waters machine or Apex, very complicated pieces of equipment to intentionally separate most of the terpenes, most of the cannabinoids, most of the fats and waxes, and then they take the terpenes and mix it back together. And anybody who has done that and has experience with this knows that it may be really nice, it may taste really good, but because of how it works by nature, the design of that particular type of machine, it's intentionally cutting, the top and bottom end off of certain spectrums and putting it into a separation vessel. And so you're losing the top and bottom end of that spectrum. Okay, that's just for starters. And I'm just trying to put it in, terms that people are going to understand.
Sure, sure.
The other part is it's very high pressure. You're talking about 1800 psi or better for most of these CO2 machines, which is a lot of pressure. And so you're twisting, you're distorting those molecules, and it's also under heat in a lot of cases. So you're changing them. The same thing goes for the terpenes. So you're shaving parts of it off. You're also now missing other spectrums of flavonoids and the vitamins and minerals you may or may not catch if they're sort of nested in with the other molecules you're separating. Then you're mixing those all back together, a lot of times in a ratio that people are just making up off the top of their head. And so then they go out and call that a full spectrum because they're putting it all together. In my mind, people can say what they want, but that's not a full spectrum. That's an added back, that is a blend, and there's no one particular full spectrum there. When we do blending, we blend full spectrums together. We don't take terpenes and mix it with cannabinoids. And there's a lot of that going on. So even in the hydrocarbon industry, to which I love the science and I'm quite fond of how a lot of the finishes work out, inherently, if you're intentionally crashing out the THC and pulling that out of there, right, you've broken bonds, you've changed it. So to call it a full spectrum, that's a little sketchy in my mind. It's definitely possible to do a full spectrum hydrocarbon extract, but the way people are doing things nowadays with the diamonds and crashing out the terpenes, obviously you're starting to separate spectrums. So, and people wholeheartedly believe that they're presenting full spectrum in a lot of cases, but unless you really test it out and see before and after off the plant, you're not going to really be able to determine what's missing, what's dropped out. And again, that's why we found that ethanol is the top tier of being able to fingerprint, and solventless is definitely up there. The problem with solventless in terms of full spectrum, from my experience, and it's the same thing with everything in solventless, you have to have the right input material.
Right.
And so you can end up with the right input material and have it dump, but it's still going to end up with a lot of lipids, or it's going to break spectrum somewhere. And you can find one, that just dumps the full spectrum of what was on that plant material. And it really depends on what strains were combined and how it was hybridized and just how that plant reacts to being grown in its environment. So solventless is the true expression of the art form of hashish. You really have to have every little parameter just right in order to end up with the product that you're expecting.
That's a great explanation. And it's really interesting to hear that, in your mind, and I think it sounds like solventless has this area that it very much fits into the equation as an artisan product. But obviously, for some people with medical conditions, it may or may not be the top thing that might give them the best relief, just depending on the strain. I mean, what kinds of strains are you seeing that work the best with solventless? Do you have any that you're particularly fond of, or any traits that, you would encourage people to look at?
Well, first off, I do want to encourage people to find solventless products if they're into edibles, because in my experience, properly made solventless gummies, for instance, with a really nice bubble hash is probably the best you're going to find in terms of a THC product. You really are getting a very hard-hitting, full-spectrum product there if it's made properly. In terms of strains, We find that a lot of the older Afghanis and Kushes really put out a lot of hash.
Hmm.
We also find that a lot of the older sours and the original OGs and crosses of the original OGs before they start to get too muddy are
Hmm.
putting out a lot of hash. In saying that, a lot of the original OGs, at least from our perspective up here, there's a couple of sort of classifications of those. There's one that has sort of the rounded flowers, and there's ones that have the cone longer flowers.
Hmm.
And depending on which version you have, in my experience, the more conical ones tend to have the less greasy, more extractable and solventless types of trichomes versus the round ball type of OGs, which again, this is generalizing, but tend to have that greasier look and almost a painted on resin look.
Hmm.
Those, when you extract them, they tend to become greasy, which could be good for certain things like edibles, but in terms of having a nice presentation of a full melt,
Mm.
it would be very difficult. And, you know, to get a stable version of a rosin where it's not always sticky and actually workable into another finish, you need to stay away from those ones that are really greasy. Um, the other ones I think that are pretty obvious, and a lot of the hash makers out there are going to cringe, but there's things like the Tangy crosses are pretty reliable. You
Yeah.
know, uh, they may not always put out, you know, the largest amounts of hash. In certain cases, they put out the most. In some cases, they don't.
Yeah.
But we really like a lot of the citrus, the grapefruit type of notes that you can get out of Tangy crosses.
Hmm.
And so if you get the right one, again, that'll be a nice high output, high yielder, easy to work with, easy to finish, easy to create multiple finishes, whether it's a sap or a snap and pull or even a shatter or butter or a batter. I mean, you can pretty much do it all. With the heavier cushes, a lot of the older school, you know, heavier Afghani based stuff we find pretty easy to work with, easy to extract. When you start to get into more of the southern style um, land race, very thin leaf type of plant, a lot of times that resin is very fine and you end up with a poor yield, or it'll end up greasing on you. It's not quite stable.
Mm.
They can be extremely flavorful, but you know, we have a lot of problems with stability with them. So we tend to stay in certain ranges. We're always experimenting. We try new flavors all the time based on what the parents are,
Hmm.
but you can't always go by that. We had a strain recently that both parents are unbelievable hash strains, and the kid of those parents makes a great hash, but it doesn't dump and it doesn't perform like the parents. So
Hmm.
it's pretty interesting.
Well, it sounds like, I mean, you've been around the game so long that you've seen what there is to see with these strains and these ways of extraction. I'd also like to get your input on kind of like ice water hash versus sift, because ice water hash is having this renaissance, over the last couple of years, I think, as the technologies. I mean, we're working on a automated washer that we've seen produce a 6-star, but sift, the technology and the ultrasonics, like you alluded to, are still a little bit in the shadows, and people have experimented with them, but there's not quite as much out there. Do you think that sift and ice water can produce a comparable quality? And could you, maybe break down some of the differences between those two for solventless for us? I'm sure people would love to hear about your experience with, sift as well, not just ice water.
Well, sift is where myself and a lot of people started because there was no equipment available, so we all bought tons of silk screens, and like I
Mm.
said, we tried to see which weave did the best. Um, I personally believe that you can have just as good of a sift as a water hash, but
Hmm.
there's a caveat to that. If you're talking about 6-star full melt, both done with extreme care, I believe that they are parallel to one another.
Mm.
In terms of production, you know, producing 6-star is not easy on a large level, even with people with a lot of equipment and expertise and proper environments. It
Right.
really takes a lot of testing, test washes, and really pre-calculated moves to do it.
Mm-hmm.
But overall, I think volume-wise, you can really put out a lot more 6-star if you have the right strain and the right environment with water. I
Mm-hmm.
think you can put it out a lot faster currently with what we're dealing with.
Yeah.
When it comes to dry sift, again, is a real art form. I think Bubble Man, has had some of the best instructionals on it. You have to have a lot of patience, a
Yeah.
great set of screens, and you just sit there, basically processing over and over through the same screens to get your full melt out of it. That's one way to do it, to get your 99% heads. And then several people now have started to perfect the static method where they're using things like paint rollers wrapped in parchment and passing it over the top of a big tray full of the dry sift. And that static clings all the heads to the front of the roller, and the
Right.
waste tends to gather on the back. And so they just do that over and over and over and over and over again. People like the Jungle Boys have really perfected that. And then they make hash out of that, and it's obviously going to be stellar.
Yeah, and I'll
So,
give credit to Cuban for that too. I don't know if you follow Cuban Grower and his wife, they're all about sift and that static tech, and it seems like some of the stuff they've put out is, on par with any ice
incredible.
water hash, but it sure looks like it's a labor of love. I mean, no question about that.
That's the problem with all of this stuff. Any producer in the legal industry, especially because we have to watch all of our finances now very closely,
Mm-hmm.
will tell you it's very hard to make money in the solventless world because of the amount of labor involved. The fresh frozen harvest is a very, very laborious harvest,
Mm-hmm.
and it has to be done just right, so. And then producing, even if you're doing cured flour, just producing and taking the time to take, 5 pounds of dry sift and narrow that down to maybe a half a pound of good heads, or even a quarter pound of good heads. It takes all day. It's definitely a labor of love. You have to pay attention. You can't just do it and watch TV. And hats off to all the people doing that. It's an incredible art form, and it takes a lot of patience and a lot of practice. But anybody watching that's not a producer, I'd like to know that really a lot of this stuff, you just, if you read up on it, there's great instructionals now. You just have to practice and just start slow and small. You can get small sets of screens, small sets of water hash bags, even
Yeah.
a gallon water hash bag. Start slow and learn the technique. Get it down, find where you can improve just little bits here and there.
Mm-hmm.
It is pretty intuitive after a while, and it is very zen, and it's very, rewarding. It's instant gratification in a lot of cases because you get to try your wares, especially when it comes to the dry sift. You can try it immediately. So
Mm-hmm.
just practice, practice, practice. And a lot of times what you see people doing on the internet, sometimes people are intentionally misguiding you, and sometimes it's just their particular setup. You guys out in Colorado have completely different conditions than we do in Humboldt County.
Super dry.
And right, it gets very dry here and very humid here. It gets very
Mm.
cold. It gets really hot. So, we all have our challenges, and the atmosphere definitely plays a big role in it. Um, you can play in a room. If somebody has an air-conditioned room, that's a great room to start playing in, to see the benefits of using cold temperatures with your equipment and your
Mm-hmm.
extraction techniques. And um, anybody can be a hash maker. You really just have to practice, and that's the problem. Is people need the material,
Yeah.
right? So if you don't have access and you're not a grower, then it's really hard. But just stick with it, because really, I believe anybody can make really good hash, and it's very rewarding. Even if you just make a little bit for yourself and still have to buy most of it, I think it's worthwhile to experience and know what people go through. Very thin margins on most of the hash being made out there that's high end. There's plenty of low end stuff. made from the bee material. But, when you see all these great brands on the shelf making live rosin, just know that people went through a lot just to get it on that shelf. It used to be you didn't have to pass testing, so you could have something that looked and smelled amazing and worked amazing, but it would never pass a test. Nowadays, with the heavy metal testing and the pesticide testing and the biological testing, you have a really amazing product that somebody had to be very careful with from the time they planted that plant until the time they filled that jar for the customer. And that's really why solventless, especially the live products, are so amazing. Such caution has to be taken in every single step in order to pass the test and get it to market. So again, any of the producers of live rosin anywhere in the world that's getting their stuff to market, congratulations. And I personally look forward to trying your product.
That's awesome. And, that's something that, we're hearing and seeing all day, and just trying to educate people on how much effort goes into making these real top shelf solventless products. So with the time we've got left, we've just got a couple minutes here. And for everyone who did not catch the full episode, you really need to. Harry is a fountain of knowledge and has more experience. I mean, we could sit here for hours and days and go through things. But we will have the episode up on YouTube, and this will be up on Instagram shortly thereafter. So with the remaining time that we have left, where can people find your products? And what would you recommend to people? It'll kick us off in about 3 minutes. So, give us the pitch, and where can people find some of your products?
Well, we are throughout the state of California only right now.
Okay.
I definitely foresee us ending up in other states, hopefully Colorado.
Awesome.
Love to be closer to you guys.
Yeah, totally.
Right now we're all over California from end to end, and we're getting into more stores every single week. People can go to rosettewellness.com and go to the dispensary finder and take a look through there and see where we're at. We do update it frequently, and we are entering new stores weekly. It's kind of amazing the reaction that we've gotten. And in terms of what to try, the Emerald Cup products, I think my favorite products right now are the live rosin cartridges.
Mm-hmm. Sweet.
We do have some excellent hash rosins available right now, and we're just coming out with the jarred flower from this season. We just released a cereal milk. That's an excellent specimen, and from the original genetics, as well as a Mac 1. And those are both beautiful flowers to smoke, both in jars and pre-rolls. And we're going to be making some variations of hash-infused pre-rolls. We tend to use some really good bubble hash in our pre-rolls so that it's really flavorful and powerful. And, on the Rosette side, I would say, if you're going to start with one tincture, I think a female should start with wellness and a man should start with balance, and just start there. Find your minimum effective dose and experiment with it. And if you're new to cannabis altogether and you don't feel like you want to even risk any kind of effects, you can try our number 20 just to step in the door and realize that it really is okay in here. And you'll feel a lot of effects. You'll have anti-anxiety, calming, sharp focus, and so on, just from our number 20, which is our flagship product. We're going to be coming out with a lot of different flavors of live rosin in jars here. We just harvested Emerald Cup has its own farm that we operate in Mendocino. Tim Blake blessed us with that.
Awesome.
And we grow 10,000 square feet of nothing but fresh frozen. And we have some staples that are Emerald Cup strains, like the Bianchetto, which is an amazing hash strain. It puts out more than our other strains currently. It's a fuel type. That will be released again in cartridges and 1 gram jars. And then right now we have another 6 flavors that we're going to be putting out, and probably another 6 flavors after the next harvest. We have a lot of partner farmers that have amazing strains as well that use our biological organic growing technique.
I don't want to
Um,
cut you off. I apologize, but the
no
segment
problem.
is literally going to end on us in 15 seconds. So thank you so much, Harry, for taking time out of your day to join us. We're going to tag you. Make sure to follow Rosette Wellness and Emerald Cup Supply Co. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for inviting us.